It was the kind of house you'd drive past and never notice. A two-story beige box with white shutters and a sky-blue front door, nestled in a sleepy Alabama suburb. Lawns were mowed, flags hung neatly from porches, and kids biked home before dark. Inside that house, Elaine Matthews lived a quiet life. Or so everyone thought. She was 39, a mother, a former nurse who'd given up her career to raise her daughter and care for her husband, Jeremy. A school principal, respected by colleagues, admired by students. To the outside world, Elaine and Jeremy were solid. The couple everyone looked to in church when the pastor spoke about faith and family. And then there was Grace, 13, clever, quiet, obsessed with butterflies and painting, often seen sketching in the backyard beneath the oak tree. A girl whose world had always been small, simple, and wrapped in the arms of her mother. But Elaine had begun to notice something that didn't feel right. It started as a whisper in her gut, that sixth sense only mothers carry. Jeremy had grown strange, not angry, not distant. Worse, he had become too close to Grace. At first, it was subtle, lingering hugs, a too soft voice, extra time helping with homework that didn't need help. Elaine tried to dismiss it. She told herself it was just parenting, just fatherly affection. But every time she passed the cracked door of Grace's bedroom and saw Jeremy's shadow hunched beside her, her stomach twisted in ways she couldn't explain. Then came the moment that changed everything. One night, Elaine couldn't sleep. The AC buzzed. The house was still. She walked down the hallway barefoot, careful not to wake anyone. Grace's light was still on. Strange for a school night. When she pushed the door open, she found Jeremy sitting too close, his hand resting on Grace's knee. The air turned to ice. Jeremy looked up, surprised. Elaine didn't say a word. She just stared. Grace, her face blank, didn't move. Elaine forced a smile. "Honey, it's late," she said softly. "Time for bed." Jeremy stood quickly, brushing past her. But as he walked away, she noticed Grace flinch at his touch. That was the moment she knew. From then on, the house with the blue door became a quiet hell. Elaine watched her husband's every move, every word he said to Grace. Every moment they were alone. And Grace, once bubbly, now quiet as a ghost, retreated into herself, barely speaking, barely eating. Elaine wanted to scream. She wanted to drag Grace out of that house and run. But she had no evidence, no bruises, no proof. Just 1,000 moments that scraped at her heart until it bled. She began to write everything down. The times Jeremy entered Grace's room, the comments he made, the way Grace seemed to disappear inside her own skin. And then, one day, she opened Grace's sketchbook, and what she found broke her in two. The next parts will follow this structure. It was a Saturday morning when Elaine found it. The sun had barely risen, spilling golden light through the curtains as she stood in Grace's empty room. Silent. Too silent. The girl had gone to stay with her aunt overnight, and the house had the kind of quiet that echoed. Elaine had come in to gather laundry. That's all. But when she reached for the pile at the foot of the bed, her fingers brushed against the corner of a notebook. Grace's sketchbook. The one she always clutched to her chest like it was made of glass. Elaine hesitated. She knew what it meant to a child to have a private world, a safe place no one touched. But something in her chest said, "Open it." Something deeper than guilt, deeper than fear. A mother's instinct sharpened by dread. So she sat on the bed and flipped the cover. The first pages were innocent. Butterflies, trees, a self-portrait, scribbled with colored pencils in Grace's uneven hand. Elaine nearly closed it. Then she turned another page, and her breath caught in her throat. The drawing was of two figures, one tall, broad, unmistakably a man, the other small, hunched, with long hair. A bedroom, a closed door, the man's hand reaching out. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. She flipped more pages. A hallway, a man with his back turned, the small figure crying into a pillow. Another, more crude but unmistakable, the two in bed. Her daughter, trapped in a child's drawing that told the kind of story Elaine couldn't deny anymore. By the time she reached the last page, Elaine was shaking. The final sketch was a heart, broken in two. In the center were two stick figures, one labeled "Me," and the other, a word scrawled in shaky red letters, "Daddy." Below it, in a childish scrawl, were four words that tore Elaine's soul apart. "I don't feel safe." She didn't cry. Not at first. Not even when she slid the sketchbook back beneath the blanket and stood up, legs unsteady, heart hammering so loudly it was hard to breathe. She walked straight into the bathroom and threw up. An hour passed. Maybe two. The world outside kept turning. Neighbors mowing lawns, birds chirping, life continuing like nothing was wrong. Elaine waited until Grace returned that afternoon. She welcomed her with warmth, like always, but her hands trembled when she touched her daughter's hair. Later, as they sat together in the kitchen over grilled cheese, Elaine reached across the table and gently asked, "Gracie, can I ask you something? And I want you to know, you can tell me anything. You're safe with me." Grace stared at her plate, picking at the crusts. Elaine continued softly, "Your drawings, the ones in your notebook. I saw them." Grace's hand stopped moving. "You don't have to say anything," Elaine whispered, "but I need to know. Is something happening? Has Daddy ever done something to you?" Grace didn't speak. She didn't cry. But her eyes slowly filled with tears, and she gave the smallest, most fragile nod. And that was it. Elaine didn't scream, didn't wail. She reached across the table and held her daughter close, held her tighter than she ever had before. And as Grace shook in her arms, whispering fragments of truth, the touches, the secrets, the shame, Elaine knew her life was over. Not in the tragic way people say, but in the transformative way. The way fire consumes paper. The way love turns into war. Because from that moment on, there was no more denial. No more waiting. No more blue door fairy tale. There was only one thing left in Elaine's world now: vengeance. Elaine didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room, while Mark breathed deeply beside her, oblivious. The weight of his presence, the same chest she once rested on, the same arms that held their daughter as a baby, felt monstrous now, unbearable. There was no going back. That evening, she'd recorded Grace's whispered words on her phone. Quiet, shaky testimony. Just in case. She wasn't thinking like a mother anymore. She was thinking like a soldier. A wounded animal backed into a corner. A woman who had finally seen the devil living in her home. By 3 a.m., the decision had hardened in her like cooled steel. She slipped out of bed silently. Didn't bother turning on the light. Her fingers moved on instinct. Downstairs to the kitchen drawer, past the wine opener and batteries, to the old Bic lighter she used for candles. She grabbed the gasoline can from the garage. It was half full, left over from a summer project Mark never finished. The house was still. Grace slept soundly in her room, safe for now, unaware that her mother was about to light a match that would burn away the lies. Elaine started in the living room, the couch, the curtains, the old braided rug, then the hallway, the baseboards soaked carefully, silently. Her hands shook, but her heart didn't. She reached their bedroom last. Mark stirred as she crept in. "Elaine?" he muttered. "What are you doing?" She stood there in the dark, holding the gas can. The smell had begun to rise around them, sharp and bitter. She didn't speak. Mark sat up, blinking. "What the hell is that smell?" She took a step forward, tipping the can. The liquid splashed across the sheets. "Jesus, what?" He lunged out of bed, reaching for her arm. She stepped back. "Don't touch me," she said. Her voice was flat, not afraid, not angry, just final. Mark froze. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, or maybe he saw something in her eyes that told him she already knew, that there was no more pretending, no more hiding behind bedtime stories and bedtime routines. "You don't understand," he began. Elaine laughed, and it came out like a sob cracked in half. "Number, you don't understand. I know everything, Mark. I saw her drawings. I heard what you said to her." He opened his mouth. Don't you dare lie to me one more time." The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was years of broken trust settling into place. It was the sound of glass cracking from the inside. "I begged God to give me another way," she said, "but I don't think he was listening anymore." She struck the lighter. A tiny flame danced in her hand, flickering, trembling like a child's breath. And for a moment, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but grief. Grief for the woman she used to be, for the home they could have had, for the little girl sleeping down the hall who would grow up knowing her father was a monster. And her mother did something about it. Mark rushed her then, desperate, furious. The flame dropped. The world turned white. An explosion of heat and orange light. Curtains curled inward. Walls screamed in blistered wood. Mark flailed, engulfed in fire and gas-soaked rage. Elaine didn't move. She didn't scream. She stood there, her skin kissed by heat, her eyes full of tears, and watched him burn. And somewhere inside her, something whispered, "Now she's safe." When firefighters pulled her from the wreckage, blackened, coughing, clothes scorched, she didn't fight. She looked them straight in the eyes and said, "I started it. I had to. For Grace." And she meant every word. Elaine Holloway didn't cry in court. She didn't wear black. She didn't bow her head. She didn't play the victim, because she knew she wasn't one. Not anymore. The courtroom buzzed with whispered judgments, as if the crowd couldn't decide whether they were staring at a grieving widow or a monster in makeup. The prosecution painted her as the latter, cold, calculated, unrepentant. A woman who had plotted her husband's death with fire and fury, who turned her home into a furnace of vengeance. But Elaine sat there, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes locked straight ahead, unmoving. Because she wasn't here to make them comfortable. The defense called her to the stand on the 5th day. The courtroom settled like dust before a storm. "Mrs. Holloway," her attorney began, "can you explain to the court?" "Why?" Elaine looked toward the jury. 12 strangers, 12 possible futures. She cleared her throat. "You ever look at your daughter," she began, "and know something's wrong, but you just don't want to believe it?" No one answered. No one had to. "I loved Mark," she continued. "I married a good man, a good father, a protector. That's who I thought he was." She paused. The courtroom hung on her every word. "But one night, I found a sketchbook. Grace's. She draws all the time. It's how she talks to the world." Elaine's voice wavered, just a little. There were pictures, over and over. A man with a badge, a girl in pigtails. Her, I think. The man had red eyes, sharp teeth. She drew fire behind him. She wrote, "Mommy doesn't know." She gripped the edge of the witness stand, like it might hold her together. I asked her about it. She was scared. She said Daddy told her it was a game, that if she told me, I'd be taken away. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge called for order. Elaine pressed on. She said it started when she was 8. That's when the nightmares began. That's when she started flinching when he kissed her forehead. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. A mother always knows. Her eyes flicked toward the prosecution's table, and when I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told me I was overreacting, that I'd ruin his career, that I'd lose Grace, that no one would believe me over him. A beat of silence. I did what I had to do. I chose my daughter. I'd choose her again. Her voice was iron now, unapologetic, unbreakable. If protecting her makes me a murderer, then so be it. The courtroom was quiet. Even the judge looked away. The prosecutor stood. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, adjusting his tie, "you could have gone to the police. You could have filed a report. Why didn't you?" Elaine met his gaze. "Because I am the police wife. I know what happens to women like me. I know how these things get buried. And I know how many times girls like Grace get told, it's not enough." "And now?" he asked. "Now, what does Grace have?" Elaine didn't flinch. "She has one less monster in her life, and one mother who finally did something." With that, she stepped down, walked past rows of shocked faces, head high, because the fire might have taken her home, her husband, even her future. But it gave her back something else. Her voice, her daughter's safety, and the one thing no jury could ever take away: her decision. The verdict came on a Thursday, the kind of day where the sky stays gray like even heaven didn't want to look down. The courtroom was packed, reporters in the back, locals in the middle, strangers up front, pretending they didn't already make up their minds. Elaine Holloway stood when the judge asked her to. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't blink. She was made of something harder now. Bone fused with fire. Will forged from ruin. The judge spoke slowly, as if the words might break. "For the charge of second-degree murder, this court finds you guilty." A hush fell, but Elaine didn't flinch. The judge continued. "You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. There was no gasp, no wail, just silence that pressed in like water rising in a sealed room. And then a single voice, small, soft, trembling, from the gallery. "Mommy?" Everyone turned. It was Grace, now 14, hair longer, shoulders slightly hunched like she was still carrying secrets, but no longer carrying fear. She stood beside her guardian, clutching a worn teddy bear, the same one Elaine had salvaged from the fire. She took a step forward, then another. A bailiff blocked her, but the judge, moved by something human, nodded once. Grace walked until she stood just feet from the woman in cuffs. Elaine turned to her daughter. Their eyes met. Grace didn't smile. She didn't cry. She whispered, "You believed me." Elaine's voice cracked for the first time in weeks. "I always did." The bailiff stepped in gently, guiding Elaine away. As she passed Grace, she said softly, "You draw whatever you want now. No more secrets. No more monsters." And then she was gone. Years passed. Grace grew into her name. She moved in with her mother's sister, learned to garden, to paint, to sleep without the lights on. Her therapist said healing was a journey, not a sprint. Grace said it felt more like a mountain, one she climbed in silence, some days just inching forward. But she kept climbing. She visited Elaine every birthday, every Christmas, every time her nightmares started to creep back in. They sat across glass, sometimes talking, sometimes just holding the phone in silence. Elaine had changed. Her hair grayed, her skin paled, but her eyes, those stayed the same, steady, fierce, loving. The community never quite made peace with her story. Some still called her a murderer, others a martyr. But Grace didn't care what they called her mother. She called her brave. One spring, at age 19, Grace returned to the house, or what was left of it, the charred foundation, the mailbox still bearing the name Holloway. She stood there in the tall grass, sketchbook in hand. She opened to the first page and began to draw. This time it wasn't a monster. It was her mother, arms outstretched, shielding a child. Behind her, smoke. Before her, light. And beneath the drawing, Grace wrote one word: safe. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe. Sometimes it wears handcuffs. And sometimes the real sentence isn't prison. It's living with what you had to become to protect the one person you loved most. But for Grace, there were no more secrets, just ashes and the woman who rose from them.